Er, the Sunday morning sun warmed the peaceful neighborhood of Pine Grove as Dr. Michelle Thompson gathered Emma's park essentials. It was their special park day, a tradition they had kept since Emma became part of her family 3 years ago. Michelle watched her 5-year-old daughter bounce excitedly near the front door, her blonde curls bouncing with each hop. "Ready for the park, sweetie?" Michelle asked, tucking an extra juice box into their small cooler bag. Emma nodded eagerly, already wearing her favorite pink sneakers that lit up with each step. The walk to Riverside Park was short, just 2 blocks from their beautiful 2-story home. Mitchell held Emma's small hand as they walked, listening to her daughter chat about the butterfly she had seen in their garden that morning. This was what Michelle loved most about their Sunday mornings, these simple, precious moments with her daughter. The playground came into view, and Emma's eyes lit up at the sight of the newly installed swing set. The park was quiet at this hour, with only a few other families enjoying the pleasant weather. Mitchell recognized most of them. They were regulars like herself. There was old Mr. Johnson walking his golden retriever, Mrs. Martinez with her twins on the slide, and a few new faces she hadn't seen before. "Can we go on the swings first, Mommy?" Emma asked, her blue eyes sparkling with excitement. Mitchell smiled, remembering how far they had come. When Emma first arrived at age 2, she had been so shy and uncertain, a normal reaction for a child who had moved between 3 foster homes. Now, at 5, she was confident and full of joy. They found an empty swing, and Michelle carefully helped Emma onto the seat. She started pushing gently, smiling as Emma's giggles filled the air. "Higher, Mommy, higher," Emma called out, and Michelle obliged, keeping a watchful eye on the height. As they played, Michelle noticed a woman she hadn't seen before watching them from the bench near the playground. The woman, probably in her 50s with perfectly styled gray hair and expensive-looking workout clothes, seemed to be paying unusual attention to them. Mitchell tried to ignore the familiar discomfort rising in her chest. As a black mother with a white child, she had learned to deal with curious and sometimes hostile stares. Emma was oblivious to the watching woman, lost in her own world of swing set joy. "Look, Mommy, I'm flying," she exclaimed, stretching her legs toward the sky. Mitchell pushed those negative thoughts aside and focused on her daughter's happiness. After the swings, they moved to the sandbox where Emma loved to build castles. Michelle sat on the edge, helping her daughter pack sand into her pink plastic bucket. She had brought Emma's favorite sand toys, a small shovel, some seashells for decorating, and different-sized molds for making towers. Other children began joining them in the sandbox, and Michelle smiled as Emma shared her toys without hesitation. This was something they had worked on, sharing and making friends. Emma had come such a long way from the timid toddler who used to hide behind Michelle's legs whenever another child approached. "Mommy, can you help me make a big tower?" Emma asked, already starting to fill the largest bucket with sand. Michelle moved closer, showing her how to pack the sand tightly so the tower wouldn't fall. They worked together, creating a magnificent castle complete with shell decorations and a moat around it. As they built their sand castle, Michelle noticed more parents arriving at the park. Some waved hello. They knew Michelle and Emma from previous weekends. Dr. Thompson was well known in the community, not just as the kind pediatrician from Pine Grove Medical Center, but as an active member of the PTA at Emma's press school. The morning was perfect. The weather was just right. Emma was having fun, and Michelle felt blessed watching her daughter play. She took out her phone to snap a few pictures of Emma proudly showing off their sandcastle. These were the moments she treasured, the simple joys of motherhood she had dreamed about during the 2-year adoption process. Little did Michelle know that their peaceful Sunday morning was about to change. The woman on the bench had pulled out her phone and was now openly recording them, her suspicious gaze fixed firmly on Michelle and Emma's interaction. The storm was about to begin, but for now, in these precious moments, there was just a mother and daughter enjoying their special park day together. Patricia Weber considered herself the unofficial guardian of Pine Grove's safety. Having moved to the neighborhood just 3 weeks ago, she was determined to make her mark as someone who kept things in order. She sat on her usual bench at Riverside Park, wearing her designer athleisure wear and expensive running shoes, though she had no intention of actually exercising. Her morning had been uneventful until she noticed Dr. Michelle Thompson and Emma arrive at the park. Patricia's eyes narrowed as she watched the pair, her mind immediately jumping to conclusions. In her world, things had to fit into neat, familiar boxes, and this situation didn't match her narrow view of what a family should look like. She pulled out her phone, opened her neighborhood watch group chat, and started typing. Suspicious activity at Riverside Park. African American woman with a white child. Something doesn't seem right. Her fingers hovered over the send button, but she decided to gather more evidence first. Patricia zoomed in with her phone's camera, recording Michelle and Emma's interactions. She completely missed the genuine love in their playful moments. The gentle way Michelle helped Emma on the swings, the proud smile when Emma shared her toys, and the careful attention as they built sandcastles together. Instead, Patricia saw what her prejudiced mind wanted to see. Several other parents at the park noticed Patricia's behavior. Mrs. Martinez, who had known Michelle and Emma for years, kept glancing worriedly in their direction. Mr. Johnson, walking his dog nearby, slowed his pace to keep an eye on the situation. They could all see what Patricia was doing, and they didn't like it one bit. "This has gone on long enough," Patricia muttered to herself, standing up from her bench. She smoothed her expensive yoga pants and gripped her phone tightly, still recording. As she walked toward Michelle and Emma, she practiced what she would say in her head, convinced she was about to be a neighborhood hero. Emma was just showing Michelle a seashell she had found in the sandbox when Patricia's shadow fell over them. Michelle looked up, immediately recognizing the woman who had been watching them. She instinctively moved closer to Emma, who sensed the tension and pressed against her mother's side. "Excuse me," Patricia said loudly, holding her phone up obviously. "I need to ask you some questions about this child." Her voice carried across the playground, causing several nearby parents to turn their heads. Some began moving closer, concerned about what was unfolding. Michelle took a deep breath, having faced similar situations before. She had learned to stay calm for Emma's sake, even when facing such blatant prejudice. "I'm Emma's mother," she said firmly but politely, reaching into her bag where she kept Emma's adoption papers. Patricia's face twisted with disbelief. "Oh, really?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Because I find that hard to believe. I've been watching you too, and something just isn't right here." She emphasized the word right while continuing to record with her phone. Emma clutched Michelle's arm tighter. "Mommy?" she whispered, confusion and fear evident in her voice. Michelle wrapped a protective arm around her daughter, her heart breaking at Emma's distress. By now, other parents had gathered nearby. Mrs. Martinez had moved closer to the sandbox, her twins watching wide-eyed beside her. Mr. Johnson had positioned himself just a few feet away, his usually friendly face set in a concerned frown. "I've been sitting here watching you for the past hour," Patricia continued, her voice getting louder. "And I think everyone here would agree that this situation needs to be investigated." She looked around, expecting support from the other parents, but found only disapproving stares. Michelle stood up slowly, keeping Emma close to her side. She had dealt with prejudice before, but never so openly aggressive, never with someone filming her and her daughter without permission. The peaceful Sunday morning had turned into something ugly, and she could feel Emma trembling slightly against her. The park had grown eerily quiet. Even the children who had been playing nearby had stopped to watch. The only sounds were the creaking of empty swings in the breeze and Patricia's voice as she continued her misguided interrogation, completely oblivious to the community's growing disapproval of her actions. Michelle stood her ground at the sandbox, one hand holding Emma's trembling fingers while the other reached for her phone in her back pocket. She knew she needed to document this situation too. Years of experience as both a doctor and an adopted mother had taught her to always keep records. "I want to see some ID," Patricia demanded, her phone still recording everything. "And papers proving you're related to this child." She took another step closer, making Emma hide further behind her mother's legs. "Ma'am," Michelle replied, her voice steady and professional, the same voice she used with difficult parents at her pediatric practice. "You have no authority to demand anything from me or my daughter. You're frightening her, and I'm asking you to step back." But Patricia wouldn't back down. "I'm a concerned citizen," she announced loudly, looking around at the growing crowd of onlookers. "And I have every right to protect children in our community. How do we know you haven't taken her?" Mrs. Martinez had heard enough. She stepped forward, her twins watching from a safe distance. "Michelle and Emma have been coming to this park for years," she said firmly. "You're the one causing trouble here." Patricia waved her hand dismissively at Mrs. Martinez. "You don't know what could be going on. Things aren't always what they seem." She turned back to Michelle. If everything is legitimate, you shouldn't have any problem proving it. Michelle felt her phone vibrate, a text from David, her husband. She had sent him a quick message when Patricia first approached. He was already on his way. Taking a deep breath, Michelle made a decision. She wouldn't let this woman bully her or traumatize Emma any further. "Emma, sweetie," Michelle said softly, kneeling down to her daughter's level. "Remember what we talked about how some people might not understand our family?" Emma nodded, her blue eyes filling with tears. "But you're my mommy," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Forever and ever. You promised." Several parents in the crowd made sympathetic sounds. Mr. Johnson, still standing nearby with his golden retriever, pulled out his own phone and started recording Patricia's behavior. "This is ridiculous," Patricia snapped, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice now. "I'm calling the police. They can sort this out." She started dialing on her phone, her hands shaking slightly. Michelle straightened up, her full height matching Patricia's. "Yes, please do call the police," she said calmly. "I'd like to file a harassment complaint, and I'm sure they'd be interested in why you're filming a minor without parental consent." Patricia's face reddened, but she pressed on with her call. "Yes, hello? I'm at Riverside Park, and there's a suspicious situation with a child." Her voice trailed off as she walked a few steps away to continue her conversation. More parents had gathered now, forming a protective circle around Michelle and Emma. A teenager on a skateboard rolled past, shooting a disgusted look at Patricia. "My moms get this kind of thing too," he said to Michelle. "It's messed up." Emma tugged at Michelle's shirt. "Can we go home, Mommy?" she asked quietly. "I don't like the angry lady." Michelle's heart ached at her daughter's distress, but she knew they needed to stay. Running away would only make things worse and might traumatize Emma even more. Instead, she sat down on a nearby bench, pulling Emma onto her lap. "We're going to stay right here, sweetheart," she said softly. "Daddy's on his way, and we're going to show that lady that we don't run away when people are unkind. Remember what we say about being brave." Emma nodded against her mother's shoulder. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," she recited. "It means doing the right thing even when you are scared." The other parents had formed a barrier between them and Patricia, who was still on the phone with the police. Mrs. Martinez sat down next to Michelle, her twins following suit. "The police will be here soon," Mrs. Martinez said quietly, "and we're all staying right here with you. No one gets to treat our neighborhood families like this." Michelle felt tears prick at her eyes, touched by the show of support. She could hear Patricia's voice rising and falling as she tried to convince the police of wrongdoing, but somehow, surrounded by neighbors who knew the truth, it didn't seem quite as threatening anymore. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air at Riverside Park. Patricia stood near the park entrance, waving her arms to flag down the police cars. She had a satisfied look on her face, certain she was about to be proven right. Two police cruisers pulled up to the park, their lights flashing but sirens now silent. Officer Sarah Chen and Officer Marcus Rodriguez stepped out of the first car, while Officers Thompson and Walker emerged from the second. They took in the scene. A large group of concerned parents, a woman frantically waving them over, and a mother holding her crying child on a bench. "I'm the one who called," Patricia announced loudly, rushing toward the officers. "I've been recording everything. This woman," she pointed accusingly at Michelle, "has a child that clearly isn't hers." Officer Chen, a veteran of the force and herself an adoptive parent, shared a knowing look with her partner. They had handled similar calls before. "Ma'am," Officer Chen said calmly, "please lower your voice and stop pointing. We'll sort this out." Just then, a silver Tesla pulled up to the park, and David Thompson jumped out. He was still wearing his business suit from the meeting he'd left early. "Michelle, Emma," he called out, jogging toward his family. Emma's face lit up at the sight of her father. "Daddy," Emma called out, running to meet him. David scooped her up in his arms, and she buried her face in his neck. He walked over to Michelle, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. Patricia's mouth fell open as she watched the scene unfold. The confident expression on her face began to falter. But, she stammered, still holding up her phone. Officer Rodriguez approached Michelle, David, and Emma with a gentle smile. "Good morning, folks. I understand there's been some confusion here. Would you mind sharing your side of the story?" Michelle nodded, reaching into her bag. "I'm Dr. Michelle Thompson. This is my husband, David, and this is our daughter, Emma. We adopted her 3 years ago." She pulled out a folder containing Emma's adoption papers and their family ID cards. Documentation she had learned to always carry. Officer Chen reviewed the papers while Officer Rodriguez took statements from the surrounding parents who had witnessed everything. Mrs. Martinez showed the officers her own phone recording of Patricia's harassment, and Mr. Johnson provided his footage as well. "My mommy is the best mommy," Emma announced suddenly from her father's arms, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She makes me chicken soup when I'm sick and reads me 3 stories at bedtime." The angry lady was being mean to her. Patricia's face had turned pale as she watched the situation unravel. Officer Thompson approached her, notepad in hand. "Ma'am, I need to speak with you about a few things. First, recording a minor without parental consent is a serious issue. Second, we need to discuss the false report you made to emergency services." I was just trying to protect." Patricia's voice trailed off as she finally began to realize the gravity of her actions. Several parents had their phones out now, recording Patricia's interaction with the police. Someone in the crowd mentioned social media, and another person brought up the local news station. David hugged his family close. "Are you both okay?" he asked softly. Mitchell nodded, but he could feel her trembling slightly. Emma had calmed down but kept a watchful eye on Patricia. Officer Chen returned their documents and addressed the family. "Dr. Thompson, would you like to press charges for harassment? We have multiple witnesses and video evidence of the incident." Michelle looked at Patricia, who was now sitting on a park bench, head in her hands as Officer Thompson continued taking her statement. The woman's designer athleisure wear and expensive phone suddenly seemed less impressive as she faced the consequences of her actions. "Yes," Michelle said firmly. "Not just for us, but for every other family that doesn't fit someone's narrow view of what a family should look like. This has to stop." The gathering crowd of parents murmured in agreement. Some shared their own stories of facing prejudice and discrimination. A young mother with blue hair approached Michelle. "Thank you for standing up. My wife and I are starting the adoption process, and seeing you handle this with such grace gives us courage." As the police continued their work, the park's atmosphere began to shift. What had started as a scene of ugly prejudice was transforming into a moment of community solidarity. Emma, feeling safer now, asked to get down from her father's arms and return to the sandbox. Her parents watched as several other children joined her, their parents standing guard nearby, all of them united against intolerance. Officer Sarah Chen sat in her patrol car, typing up the initial report while her partner, Officer Rodriguez, continued gathering statements from witnesses. She paused her typing to watch the Thompson family through the windshield, noting how natural and loving their interactions were. The officer's own adoption journey flashed through her mind. The paperwork, the waiting, the joy, and yes, the occasional prejudice she and her husband faced with their adopted son. She knew exactly what Dr. Thompson had experienced today. Meanwhile, Patricia sat on a bench near the police car, her expensive phone now secured in an evidence bag. Officer Thompson stood nearby, explaining the situations she faced. "Ma'am, you're looking at several potential charges here," Officer Thompson said firmly. "Filing a false police report, harassment, and unauthorized recording of a minor. These are serious matters." Patricia's face had lost all its previous confidence. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap as reality sank in. I really thought I was helping," she stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. Near the sandbox, Emma had returned to playing, though she kept looking up to make sure her parents were still nearby. Michelle and David sat on a bench watching her, their hands clasped together. Other parents had formed a protective circle around the area, their children playing alongside Emma. Mrs. Martinez approached Officer Rodriguez with her phone. "I have more video evidence," she said. The way she was following them around the park before confronting them, it was clearly harassment. The teenager who had mentioned his 2 moms earlier came back with his mother's. Both women hugged Michelle, understanding in their eyes. "We're from the Pine Grove LGBTQ+ family support group," one of them explained. "We'd love for your family to join us." Officer Chen finished her preliminary report and stepped out of the car. She walked over to Patricia first. "Ms. Weber, we need you to come down to the station to complete your statement." Please understand that what you did today was not just wrong legally, it caused real harm to a child and her family. Patricia nodded numbly, her eyes fixed on the ground. The realization of her actions seemed to be hitting her hard as she watched other parents giving their statements, all supporting the Thompsons. Officer Chen then approached the Thompson family. "Dr. Thompson," she said warmly, "I want you to know that we're taking this very seriously. As an adoptive parent myself, I understand the challenges our families face." Emma looked up at the officer with curious eyes. "You have an adopted kid too?" she asked, some of her natural brightness returning. Officer Chen smiled and pulled out her phone, showing Emma a photo of her family. "That's my son, Tyler. He joined our family 2 years ago." Emma's face lit up. "Just like me, I joined my family 3 years ago." She turned to her parents. "Mommy, Daddy, can we have a playdate with Tyler?" The adults laughed softly at Emma's resilience, her ability to find friendship even in this difficult moment. Michelle wiped away a tear, touched by her daughter's spirit. Mr. Johnson, who had been quietly observing while holding his dog's leash, stepped forward. "I'm on the neighborhood council," he said. "We're having a meeting next week about community safety. I think this incident needs to be discussed." Other parents began sharing ideas too. Someone suggested a family diversity awareness day in the park. Another parent, a local teacher, offered to organize educational sessions about modern families at the community center. Officer Rodriguez finished gathering statements and joined his partner. "We have more than enough evidence," he said quietly to Officer Chen. "Multiple witnesses, video recordings, and clear documentation of harassment." Patricia was escorted to the second police car, all her previous self-righteousness gone. As she was about to get in, she turned back to look at the Thompson family. The sight of Emma happily playing in the sandbox, protected by a community that understood love doesn't follow a single pattern, seemed to finally break through her prejudice. "I'm sorry," she said softly, but her words were carried away by the breeze. The damage was done, but perhaps some learning had begun. The first signs of positive change were already visible. Parents were exchanging phone numbers, planning playdates, and discussing ways to make their community more inclusive. What had started as an ugly incident of prejudice was transforming into a moment of community education and growth. By Monday morning, videos of the park incident had spread across social media like wildfire. The local Pine Grove community Facebook group was filled with posts supporting the Thompson family and condemning Patricia's actions. Parents who had witnessed the event shared their recordings, each clip showing a different angle of Patricia's harassment and the community's response. Sarah Martinez, one of the witness parents, had posted her video with the caption, "This is not what our community stands for. Watch how this woman harassed a local doctor and her daughter at our park. #stop the hat, #familyaslove." The video quickly gathered thousands of views and shares. Local news stations picked up the story, and by lunchtime, reporters were gathering outside Pine Grove Medical Center, where Michelle worked as a pediatrician. Michelle's office manager, Janet, had to turn away 3 different news crews that morning. "Dr. Thompson is focusing on her patients today," she told them firmly. "She's not available for interviews." Inside her office, Michelle was doing what she did best, taking care of children and their parents, though her phone kept buzzing with messages of support. Meanwhile, at Patricia's workplace, the situation was very different. Patricia worked as a real estate agent at Luxury Homes Realty, and her face had been clearly visible in all the viral videos. The company's social media accounts were flooded with angry comments. By noon, Luxury Homes Realty released a statement on their social media platforms. "We have been made aware of the disturbing incident involving one of our agents. This behavior does not reflect our company's values of inclusivity and respect." Effective immediately, Patricia Weber has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. At Emma's press school, the teachers held a special circle time to talk about different kinds of families. Emma's teacher, Ms. Clark, read a book called Love Makes a Family and led a discussion about how families come in all shapes, sizes, and colors. "Emma's mommy is the best doctor ever," announced one of Emma's classmates. "She gave me a Spider-Man band-aid when I was sick." Other children chimed in with their own stories about Dr. Thompson, and Emma beamed with pride. The local parenting groups on social media were particularly active. A mother named Rachel Chen, who ran the Pine Grove Parents Association, created an event page for a family diversity celebration to be held at Riverside Park the following weekend. "Let's show our community what real family values look like," Rachel wrote in the event description. "All families welcome. Let's fill the park with love and support." Within hours, hundreds of people had marked themselves as attending. David Thompson's law firm also released a statement supporting their partner and his family. The firm announced they would be offering free legal consultations to families facing discrimination, and David would be heading the initiative. Local businesses around Pine Grove began putting up signs in their windows. "All families welcome here," and "Love Makes a Family" posters appeared in shop after shop. The owner of the popular ice cream parlor where Emma loved to get her favorite strawberry cone put up a special sign: "Free ice cream for all families this weekend. #PineGroveAlove." At the police station, officers Chen and Rodriguez were completing their report. The evidence was overwhelming: multiple videos, witness statements, and Patricia's own recorded admission of calling the police without cause. The district attorney's office had already expressed interest in the case. Back at home that evening, Michelle and David sat at their kitchen table after Emma had gone to bed, reading through the hundreds of supportive messages they'd received. Michelle's eyes filled with tears as she read a particularly touching email from another adoptive mother. "Dear Dr. Thompson, watching you stand strong for your daughter today gave me courage. My husband and I are white parents to a beautiful black daughter, and we face similar prejudice. Thank you for showing us how to handle these situations with grace and dignity. You've inspired our whole community." David reached across the table and squeezed his wife's hand. "Look at this," he said, showing her his phone. The local news website's headline read, "Pine Grove Stands United. Community Rallies Behind Family After Racial Profiling Incident." The article included quotes from their neighbors, photos of the supportive signs appearing around town, and details about the upcoming family diversity celebration. What had started as an ugly incident of prejudice had transformed into a powerful movement of community support and education. As they got ready for bed that night, they could hear Emma talking in her sleep. "My family is love," she mumbled, cuddling her favorite teddy bear. Those simple words from their daughter summed up everything they had been fighting for. A week after the park incident, Patricia Weber sat alone in her living room, staring at the pile of papers on her coffee table. Her life had changed dramatically in just 7 days. The police had charged her with filing a false report and harassment. Her real estate license was under review, and her face had become known across social media as Park Karen. The morning newspaper lay unopened on her table. She already knew what it would say. The story had made it to national news. Her phone kept buzzing with messages from her adult children, who were horrified by her actions. Her daughter in Seattle had called crying, asking how her mother could do something so terrible. Meanwhile, across town at the Pine Grove Community Center, a different scene was unfolding. Michelle Thompson stood at a podium, addressing a packed room of community members, reporters, and local officials. The town had organized a special meeting to discuss racial profiling and family diversity. "What happened to my family in the park happens to many families every day," Michelle said, her voice clear and strong. "But what makes our story different is how our community responded. You stood with us. You showed that love doesn't have to look a certain way." Emma sat in the front row between David and Mrs. Martinez, coloring in a picture book about different types of families. She looked up occasionally to wave at her mother, completely recovered from the incident thanks to the overwhelming support they'd received. Officer Sarah Chen took the podium next. "As a police officer and an adoptive parent, I've seen both sides of this issue," she explained. "We're implementing new training programs for all our officers about family diversity and racial sensitivity. What happened at the park will not happen again on our watch." The meeting room erupted in applause. Local businesses had donated food and drinks, and the walls were decorated with children's drawings of their families. All different, all special, all made with love. Back at her house, Patricia picked up her phone and opened her email. There was a message from her therapist confirming their next session. After her arrest, the court had ordered her to attend diversity training and counseling. At first, she had been angry about it, but now, after a week of reflecting on her actions, she was starting to understand. She clicked on a link someone had sent her to an article about transracial adoption. For the first time, she began to read with an open mind instead of judgment. The stories of families like the Thompsons started to make sense to her. She thought about Emma's scared face in the park and felt deep shame. At the community center, the meeting continued with more speakers. A teenage boy stood up to talk about growing up with two moms. A father spoke about adopting his son from China. An elderly woman shared her story of being a black child adopted by white parents in the 1960s. David Thompson took his turn at the podium. As a lawyer, I understand the importance of justice, he said. But as a father, I understand the importance of education and change. That's why we're starting a new program at our firm to help families facing discrimination. The local news cameras recorded everything. Reporter Lisa Chen, no relation to Officer Chen, took notes for her feature story titled, How One Family's Park Day Changed a Community. Her article would later win a local journalism award for its sensitive coverage of family diversity issues. After the meeting, families gathered in small groups, sharing stories and contact information. The Pine Grove Family Diversity Support Group had gained 50 new members. They planned monthly meetups at the park where the incident had happened, turning a place of bad memories into one of community and acceptance. Emma tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, can we get ice cream? The shop has the rainbow flags now." She pointed to the ice cream parlor across the street, which had joined other local businesses in displaying pride and alley flags. Michelle smiled and took her daughter's hand. As they walked to the ice cream shop, 3 different people stopped to tell them how the park incident had opened their eyes about family diversity. Emma proudly told each person, "My mommy and daddy picked me because of love." The day ended with a surprise announcement from the mayor. Pine Grove would host its first Family Diversity Festival in the spring. The planning committee would include Michelle Thompson, Officer Chen, and representatives from various family advocacy groups. As the sun set on another day in Pine Grove, the community had changed. One person's prejudice had sparked a movement of understanding and acceptance. And somewhere in her quiet living room, Patricia Weber was finally beginning to learn what family really means. 3 months had passed since the park incident. Spring had arrived in Pine Grove, bringing new flowers to Riverside Park and new changes to the community. The park where everything had started now looked different. A colorful All Families Welcome sign stood near the entrance, and the playground had been updated to be more accessible for children with disabilities. On this particular Saturday morning, Michelle Thompson stood at the park's entrance, watching families arrive for the first Pine Grove Family Diversity Festival. As head of the organizing committee, she felt proud seeing her vision come to life. Booths lined the walking paths, offering information about adoption, support groups, and community resources. Emma, now 6 years old, ran ahead to the face painting station, her friend Tyler, Officer Chen's adopted son, right beside her. Both children had chosen to have rainbow hearts painted on their cheeks. David followed them with his camera, documenting everything for the family's photo album. Mrs. Martinez and her twins were running the food station, serving dishes from different cultures. Mr. Johnson and his golden retriever helped direct parking, wearing matching t-shirts that read "Love Makes a Family." The ice cream shop had set up a free sundae bar, and the line stretched around the corner. Near the community center entrance, a woman stood nervously, holding a folder. It was Patricia Weber. After 3 months of counseling, diversity training, and community service, she had asked to speak at the festival. The court had accepted this as part of her rehabilitation program. Mitchell noticed Patricia and walked over to her. The last time they had stood face to face in this park, things had been very different. Patricia looked smaller somehow, humbler in her simple blouse and pants. No more designer workout wear. "Dr. Thompson," Patricia said softly, "thank you for allowing me to be here today." Her hands shook slightly as she held her speech notes. Michelle nodded. "Everyone deserves a chance to learn and grow," she replied. 3 months of watching Patricia's genuine efforts to change had softened her feelings toward the woman. The festival's opening ceremony began with a performance by the Pine Grove Elementary School Choir. They sang "What a Wonderful World" while children from different families held hands in a circle around them. Emma and Tyler stood together, swaying to the music. When it was Patricia's turn to speak, she walked to the microphone with quiet determination. "3 months ago, I stood in this park and showed the worst side of myself," she began. "I let prejudice and ignorance guide my actions, and I hurt an innocent family." The crowd listened in silence as Patricia continued. Through counseling and education, I've learned that family isn't about matching colors or fitting some perfect picture. It's about love, commitment, and choosing each other every day. To the Thompson family, and to every family I ever judged, I am deeply sorry. As Patricia stepped down, someone started clapping. Then another person joined in, and another, until the whole park was filled with applause. It wasn't just for her apology. It was for everyone who had ever learned to open their hearts and minds to change. The festival continued with activities throughout the day. The local library set up a reading corner with books about different types of families. Officer Chen and her colleagues hosted a workshop about community safety and respect. David's law firm provided free legal consultations to families needing assistance. Emma spent the day playing with her growing circle of friends, children from all kinds of families who didn't see anything unusual about her family anymore. She proudly showed everyone her My Family is Perfect t-shirt, designed by her art class for the festival. As the sun began to set, Michelle gathered everyone for a group photo. Hundreds of people stood together: adoptive families, mixed-race couples, single parents, same-sex parents, grandparents raising grandchildren, and supporters of all kinds. They released biodegradable balloons into the sky, each one carrying a message of love and acceptance. Patricia stood at the edge of the group, but Emma saw her and waved her over. "Come on," the little girl called out. "You're part of our community too now." Later that night, as Michelle tucked Emma into bed, her daughter asked a question that showed just how much things had changed. "Mommy, can we invite Ms. Patricia to my birthday party next month? She looked lonely, and you said everyone needs a chance to learn about love." Michelle hugged her daughter tight, amazed by her capacity for forgiveness. The incident that could have taught Emma about hate had instead taught her about compassion, growth, and the power of community to heal old wounds. As she turned out Emma's light, Michelle smiled. Their family story, which had started with love, faced prejudice with courage, and ended with forgiveness, had helped transform their entire community. In the end, love really did make a family, in all its beautiful, diverse forms.